All right, stop me if you've heard this one before. It's the Chiefs and the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and it's Bettor Hitman joining us to break down the big game from a betting perspective. You can follow Hitman's work with The Hammer, with covers, and for a peek behind the curtain at hitmansports.net. You can also follow him on the platform formerly known as Twitter at Hitman428. Hitman, happy Super Bowl week. Welcome back to Props and Hops.
Yeah, man, it's been a while, so I'm excited to get going. Thanks for having me for the biggest week of the year.
Yeah, the excitement is mutual. Nobody else I'd rather have on for this biggest week of the year. And as we get the ball rolling, want to give a shout out to the audience joining us live across YouTube and Twitter. Feel free to jump in the chat with any questions, and time permitting, we'll go ahead and address what we can. But Hitman, to get this show on the road, looking at the main markets for Super Bowl 59, the Chiefs a 1-point favorite. Money line consensus Kansas City minus 120, Philadelphia even money, total 48.5. And we're talking about the apex of market efficiency when it comes to the side money line and total. So as a jumping off point, I'd like to touch on some tension perhaps between quantitative and qualitative approaches to this matchup. On the quantitative side, my read is that the Eagles are probably considered the better team by a lot of bettors, if not just saying these are roughly equal teams. So that might suggest a bit of value on Philadelphia as the underdog here. But on the qualitative side, Kansas City brings some outsized upside to the playoffs, driven by optimal aggression from Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, and of course Patrick Mahomes. So that may suggest value on Kansas City as the short favorite in this setting. What's your read on the measurable full season bodies of work from both teams versus the less tangible, but potentially just as impactful, untapped potential for Kansas City when the stakes are at their peak?
Yeah, I mean, I just believe with Kansas City that you can't look at the year-to-date metrics from the regular season with them. I don't want to compare it like it's not a perfect comparison to say, oh, they're like the LeBron Cavs, where the LeBron Cavs all those years didn't bring all A plus effort, or the LeBron Heat didn't bring an A plus effort, and then in the playoffs they would get a big bump because obviously Kansas City's putting in a full effort. Like it's the NFL, it's not the NBA. But I do think that there is some. I do think that it is true that Kansas City does get a big bump for the playoffs, whether it's Andy Reid calling the good plays or more likely for Mahomes to run, or the fact even this year that they just got their guys healthy, like Hollywood Brown is back after missing the entire season, which actually gives this team some decent skill position players as well. Xavier Worthy is a lot different player now than he was at the beginning of the regular season. So I do think Kansas City should be bumped by a good bit from what they were in the regular season. I just believe that it's not variance that Kansas City, like very similar to New England back in the day, is just significantly better than most teams in high leverage plays and high leverage moments and high leverage games. It's going to sound very square. I'm aware of that, but in a pick'em game situation at this point with Kansas City, with how good they've been in these high leverage spots, I'm almost at the point where it feels like to me Kansas City are past until proven otherwise. I also believe that Kansas City matchup-wise just has two quality corners that can match up with Philly's wideouts. It's a very tight-knit target share in Philadelphia with not a bunch of other options to their pass game. There's a reason that there's juice on under 5.5 pass catchers for the Eagles this week. And Jalen Hurts has been very poor against pressure all year, going against the best big game defensive coordinator of all time at scheming pressure. So, yeah, I mean, I bet Kansas City in this game. Markets moved against me, and that's not a great sign considering that the limits right now at some books are $300,000. Not naive enough to say that I know more than the people that have moved the line towards Philadelphia, but yeah, Kansas City is a bet of mine. I think that you should, if you're going to bet them, shop around at exchanges. You're probably going to get a really good price on it compared to a lot of the books that are still making you lay minus 110 on the Super Bowl. But yeah, I just think that Kansas City is they just get a bump for me in the postseason and in a lot of these high leverage moments.
Well, you said you might not know more than people moving the market slightly in Philadelphia's favor, but I'll bet you do know a hell of a lot more than pretty much everybody else out there when it comes to props. So let's go ahead and pivot and get into your wheelhouse here, Hitman. If I had to blindly follow one bettor and one market without hesitation, it's you with NFL props. And a big reason why to me would be your unparalleled understanding of the market, from betting menus offered by different sports books to betting activity across the marketplace. And to that end, as we kick this off, I'd be curious for anything that stands out to you in terms of what you've seen in terms of the Super Bowl betting landscape evolving this year.
Yeah. I would say that I'm a lot better with player props than I am game props. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm doing game props for the Super Bowl, like over under longest field goal, how many players will catch a pass, all that. But player props are really my bread and butter. I mean, every single year you're seeing more offerings. So, I mean, I could pretty much say that every year. I like that this year. I feel like there's been more first quarter and first half lines out there with like individual players, which I really have been interested in attacking. I feel like there hasn't been as many opportunities with the game props just because books are so accustomed to offering it every week. Whereas I used to keep notes on what certain game props would open at and what they would close at and see if it was applicable for the next season. Back a few years ago, before the FanDuels, DraftKings, all these places were just offering these game props every single week. So they just have a lot better of an idea on how to price them. Now, of course, there are some unique ones that books aren't used to pricing every week that you could still look to attack. But there hasn't been much different, to be honest. Like, that's just some like small stuff that I can think of. But just maybe slightly more offerings and the game props being a little bit more efficient is the two biggest things that I continue to see happen.
I heard you call out quarter prop offerings right off the bat, and I'm wondering from your perspective if potential edges there could lie in seeing beyond some of the nuance that may have odds makers at times inclined to divide a full game prop by 4 and say that's what somebody might be lined at in a first quarter. How else would you describe the edges you're looking to find in these newer markets betting quarters instead of full game player props?
Yeah, I mean, one way to look is just try to look at just knowing ball, like knowing how these teams play. Like, oh, this team is more likely, this team early in games likes to get this guy involved with a manufactured touch typically, or this team, maybe they don't run the quarterback as much early in the game, but in high leverage spots, they'll start to run this quarterback more, or just especially knowing the running back rotations. Like, I consider myself really good, and one of my strengths is just watching a lot of football and knowing how teams tend to use players in certain situations. So the quarter stuff is great opportunities with running back stuff. Now, it's probably not as applicable with the Philadelphia Eagles because it's basically Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Gainwell is not playing much. But with a team like the Chiefs, they've had a specific way that they have used their backfield since Pacheco has come back. So, yeah, in the first quarter lines, definitely ways to take advantage of it if some of that holds. Now, I mean, teams could have a different game plan in the Super Bowl and it's completely thrown out the window. But that's one way to look to attack it.
And keeping on with that theme of the Kansas City backfield, on Monday's Forward Progress show, you noted Andy Reid tends to ride the hot hand. So my thought was that recency bias may have the market overvaluing Kareem Hunt and undervaluing Isaiah Pacheco. I did want to ask you, though, as a first thought, any concerns about Pacheco's health and some understandably underwhelming performance since his return from that broken fibula?
Yeah, so earlier today on on Rob Pizzola's show, I gave out Kareem Hunt under first quarter rush yards, 8.5. I know there was some 9.5 and even a little bit 10.5 that was out there, but it was going off one book's price. And Pacheco, I didn't give this out, but Pacheco over 4.5 rush yards, I think is good. Obviously, those two plays are very correlated with each other, but I'm not super concerned about the Pacheco stuff just because like it's priced into the market that like he's probably not 100% healthy right now. I mean, there was some reports from some people that are close to the Chiefs saying that. And I believe it because Isaiah Pacheco is a better running back than Kareem Hunt when both players are fully healthy, but Hunt has looked better in recent weeks, and that probably is because of injury. But again, you just got to look at how is this priced? Like if you would have that take 3 weeks ago where you say, I think Isaiah Pacheco is still hurt, well, you could have got Isaiah Pacheco at under 42.5 rushing yards against the Texans, and Kareem Hunt is sitting there at 28.5, I believe. And now it's being priced that Kareem Hunt is the guy over Isaiah Pacheco. So no real concerns about that. Again, I mean, with the first quarter stuff, like I'm very open to the fact that Kareem Hunt could start this game. He has been the better player throughout the playoffs. He's had the hot hand. There's a chance that they shift the backfield to where he starts and Pacheco mixes in and they see what happens. But the way how it's been going recent weeks, it's been Pacheco getting the start. Hunt gets hot a little bit, usually during the second drive, and they ride with them. So I'm going to take a chance that they end up doing the same thing. And again, if like for the Kareem Hunt first quarter rush yards, say he does start the game, it's not like you're dead. Like there is a path to Kareem Hunt still going under. He's one of the most inefficient running backs in the league in an extremely difficult matchup. So yeah, that's how I found attacking the first quarter, some of the first quarter stuff and the Kansas City backfield stuff.
All right. I appreciate not only the detailed context you just shared, but the time that you occupied. Give me a chance to shop Pacheco first quarter for a moment. I'm seeing at a couple offshores a 3.5 juiced at -130. Hitman, safe to assume that every yard, especially with such a low total, can mean so much that even at -130, 3.5 would still show some value.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I like that a lot.
All right, not the highest limits, but go ahead and have at it, everybody. If you see that at some offshores that tend to cater to recreational bettors, also seeing one alt line. I love with expanded Super Bowl prop betting menus, finding similar ways to get a bet that might use different language. So one book I have doesn't list Pacheco over under for the first quarter, but it does have different alt lines for the first quarter. So 5+ yards in the first quarter at reduced VIG of -105. You're basically betting the same thing. Again, that reduced VIG, probably similar in price point to the over 3.5 more juice at -130. Is that a fair take?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, carrying on with the Kansas City backfield and looking at perhaps even more potential betting angles when it comes to Hunt. I know, as you said on Rob's live stream today, you hit his first quarter market. Thinking about a full game perspective, Hunt being reliant on volume, lacking explosiveness, and going up against a stout Philadelphia run defense. Any thoughts, Hitman, on Kareem Hunt longest rush under 11.5 available at a flat -115?
I'm not the best with the longest rush and any of that stuff. It's just a market that I just tend not to put much time into. I probably should have put time into it for the Super Bowl because the limits are so much better in the Super Bowl. The reason that I don't handicap it much during the regular season is just because the limits are so much smaller. But I kind of lean towards Hunt under rush yards for the game. So it might be a little bit correlated to the fact that if he goes under rush yards, probably going to go under the longest rush as well. As I mentioned, he's just one of the most inefficient runners in the league in a really tough matchup. So without being able to give you a definite, yeah, I like that. Subjectively, I would lean towards that.
All right, I will take it, and I'll also hit rewind for a moment. Good question from Stephen Robinson in the chat asking what juice you like for Pacheco over 4.5 yards in the first quarter. I know I discussed a couple of different price points with you, but in terms of a price cutoff, how far would you go in terms of juice on Pacheco over four and a
I
half
mean,
first quarter?
I bet like minus 120-ish on over 4.5. So probably thinking like minus 130-ish at least, I would say. Good tell.
All right, and sticking with Pacheco, again, zooming out from the first quarter to the full game, he's lined in the consensus low 20s for an over-under. And you had also suggested in other appearances you've made over the course of this Super Bowl betting cycle, there could be value on alt overs for Pacheco. So I'm wondering what you might think on a couple alts I'm seeing right now at DraftKings: 40 plus yards plus 361 or 50 plus yards plus 680. Any interest in alt lines like that with those types of
Yeah,
payouts?
I think it's the better way to attack it. I haven't bet his regular over under in the low 20s, probably don't, but I just think that there's more variance to this Kansas City backfield than people are than it's being priced at. So you can obviously yeah, it's a good price to take advantage of some potential variance in this backfield if Pacheco does get the hot hand. And it's also a good thing to attack live, possibly. Just see who. I mean, I was betting last week. I was betting Kareem Hunt live over, and I was betting Pacheco live under. I kind of Kareem Hunt was a more efficient runner early in that game. Pacheco had a botched handoff. I didn't know if the coaches were going to blame that on Mahomes or blame that on Pacheco potentially, and there would be some punishment for Pacheco in that for the rest of that game. So yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on live, in my opinion.
All right, moving right along from the Kansas City backfield to a few pass catchers I'd like to discuss with you, starting with the obvious one, Travis Kelce. You'd alluded to targeting some of his unders closer to kickoff in other appearances that I've caught of yours. And like all bets, this would be highly price dependent, and it underscores the value of having access to different books and different odds providers. Current lines for Kelce, seeing receptions lined at over under 6.5, the under a consensus price of about minus 160. I'm seeing as low as minus 150 out there. Receiving yards, consensus over under about 60.5, flat minus 115, seeing as good as under 62.5, minus 115 at DraftKings. And anytime touchdown, you can take the no at about minus 160 at several books right now. So, Hitman, how would you describe your target prices for these or any other markets to potentially fade Kelce between now and kickoff?
Yeah, I'll probably be on Kelce unders closer to post. But again, when I talk about betting unders on guys in the Super Bowl closer to post, a lot of times like the FanDuels of the world who have a sharper line, or maybe even like a Circa or something, or a bookmaker, they're not going to be the books that I'm going to be betting that stuff at post, because they tend to just be a little bit more risk adverse. And if they, or excuse me, they'll take a little bit more risk, and they'll keep the line at what they believe is an efficient line. And they don't mind having a big decision on a prop like that. It's a lot of square shops, maybe small casinos that they get one limit bet and they want to move the number aggressively or something like that, or some local paperheads or whatever that tend to inflate a lot of these star players over. And there's a lot of good opportunities. It's basically, we always talk about like having outs and line shopping and everything, but like the Super Bowl is number one with that, because of the opportunities you're going to get. But you're not going to get a lot of those opportunities. Like I'll say, for example, like betting at FanDuel. Like I believe even right now, like Travis Kelce might be 60.5 at FanDuel, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pulling it up right now.
Same here.
Yeah, even right now he's 60.5. And like there's other books on the screen that are 62.5, 63.5 out there. And that's just going to get higher at some other square books potentially. So I'll be on Kelce unders. I'm still not, so I know that he's been a great playoff performer, but I'm still not sold that he's that great of a player still at this point in his career. It's a large number for a guy, and Kansas City does have a lot more depth at pass catcher than maybe they have in a few years past. So yeah, I'll probably end up on some type of Kelsey unders, I would guess.
It sounds like you have quite a bit of conviction in being on Kelsey unders in some way, shape, or form by the time the game kicks off. Is there anything with regard to current prices that you would say is bettable now, but you're just holding out for a better number? Or is there anything where you think, okay, I'm not in a spot where I'd pull the trigger on anything as we see it at this moment, but should we see a certain price pop, then that's when it's go time.
Yeah, I mean, right now there's 63 and a halfs out there. Well, there's one of them that I say probably like 64 and a half, 65 and a half is what I think some shops might go up to. And that's why I'll probably be betting under, or 63 and a half reduced veg. Remember, like there's also exchanges that are putting up props now where the liquidity might be good and you might be able to play peer to peer at 63 and a half and bet and get even money on the under. So yeah, that'll be some of the stuff I'm looking out for.
All right, duly noted as far as Kelsey is concerned. Would also like to talk Xavier Worthy for a moment here. Seeing his receiving yardage total at 57 and a half at DraftKings as well as Bet Online. And in the divisional and conference championship rounds, he was lined at 51 and a half for the most part. Of course, in the AFC title game, 6 receptions, 85 yards, and a touchdown. He used his speed to exploit a pretty slow Buffalo secondary, especially after they lost starting cornerback Christian Benford in the first quarter. Now, 26 yards from Worthy's receiving output in the AFC title game came on what I consider to be a somewhat inconclusive completion on a ball that may have hit the ground before Worthy had control of it. So maybe that's juicing his box score a bit from the AFC title game and inflating his perception heading into the Super Bowl. Speaking of the Super Bowl, the matchup this time around, some Philadelphia corners who I think represent a step up in class from that depleted Buffalo secondary. Hitman, safe to assume that when we're looking at 57 and a half for Worthy, maybe some recency bias driving an inflated line?
I don't know. I mean, the arrow's been going up for Worthy. He's Kansas City's most explosive playmaker. He kind of has had the Rashee Rice trajectory that we've seen, and they've been hyping him up a lot in press conferences about how much better he's getting week in and week out. I do think Kansas City might find themselves in a game script where they could be throwing a little bit more just because Philadelphia, it's a mismatch right now. Philadelphia's run defense against the inefficient runners of Kansas City. So I'll be honest, Worthy's been a guy that I haven't bet anything regarding his receiving yards, receptions. I mean, maybe I get some road prices closer to post on him, and I do bet some unders, but there's nothing like I'm really eyeing with Worthy right now as far as receiving goes.
Understood. 2 follow-ups to that. One, I'll bring in Carlos Santana's question from the chat. What about Worthy first quarter over receiving yards? I know you noted that there's nothing receiving wise that you're looking for Worthy yet, but in the spirit of your first quarter looks that you mentioned earlier, any thought to what I'm seeing as 8.5?
Yeah. I mean, Worthy is a guy that they like to scheme the ball early to. So I can see it from that aspect, but it's probably something I don't end up getting involved in. I did bet Xavier Worthy under 6.5 rush yards, if that helps anybody. But I'm sticking to that price with under 6.5. 5.5 is a pass. I bet like up to minus 120-ish on that.
All right, I'm going to see if I can shop around for that after we get to this next Kansas City play here. My second follow-up was going to be Worthy rushing because you had singled out that you weren't looking at anything receiving-wise from at this point, but you just covered that very well. So let's get around to 2 more Kansas City receivers. So I think there's a bit of a correlation between one getting some playing time and some production and the other not so much, you could say. And I'll lead off with Juju Smith-Schuster. You discussed liking him over 14.5 receiving yards on a covers show late last week. Currently tough to find many lines better than a flat 16.5. So at that number, I'm wondering if there's any meat left on the bone. And if not, any thoughts on correlated markets, maybe something like over 1.5 receptions, widely available in the range of minus 125.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do see. I mean, I'll name the sports book. I see, and I've actually bet at this sports book. They're taking pretty good limits. I bet. I think the limits are 5,000 right now, and I bet over 1.5 receptions on Juju Smith-Schuster a little while ago. It was plus 100 there. They moved to minus 115, but Circa's the best price right now on Juju, over 1.5 minus 115. That's bettable to me, but I would not go worse than that. And the rest of the market is worse than that. And the receiving yards has moved, unfortunately, too. So it's just one of those things that, like I've been betting Juju Smith-Schuster. I've been betting on these props, and other sharps have been betting on these props for a week and a half now. These lines have been out on guys like him, and it's just kind of been in the place right now on somebody like him. But that 1.5 minus 115 would still be playable to me, but would not go worse.
All right, I hear you on that price cutoff. And let's pivot to DeAndre Hopkins, whose receiving yardage is down from 14.5 to as low as 10.5, some 11.5s out there. Full disclosure, you drove that move. So I think I know what you feel about Hopkins's prospects for this game in general. But before that yardage dropped, I'd been considering Hopkins under 1.5 receiving yards, with the handicap being in 2 playoff games, he's posted 1 reception on 3 targets, just 28 snaps, getting usurped by Smith-Schuster, who had been serving a similar role in the passing game. So now it seems safe to say that Hopkins may be 5th, if not 6th, in the pecking order behind Kelsey, Worthy, Brown, Smith-Schuster, and possibly Noah Gray. Hitman, any thoughts on Hopkins under 1.5 receptions? Seeing that available at minus 134 at Chris/Bookmaker, and in the range of minus 145 to minus 165 at some prominent regulated books. That's a pretty wide range, but any thoughts on potential price point value when it comes to Hopkins under 1.5 receptions?
It's just been bet into place, in my opinion. I mean, it was plus 100 early in the week, and there's been a 40, 50 cent move on that. So it's just been bet into place, in my opinion. The receiving yards is getting a little bit of buyback. It's up to 12.5 some spots. There's some under 11.5 plus 105. I mean, 13.5 was kind of as low as I wanted to go on that. It did open at 16.5 early in the week. But I think the receptions has just been it's just no value with a 50 cent move. I mean, even FanDuel right now is a 65 cent move from what the opener was. So yeah, I would pass on it. I did bet Noah Gray under. Looking now, there's some 12.5, 13.5 out there. Those were bets of mine. It was Noah Gray under, but it was a smaller edge, and I have gotten market resistance on it at some sharper books, which is always a little bit concerning. But Noah Gray under was a small edge of mine.
All right, I think that covers the bases pretty thoroughly as far as the Kansas City skill position players are concerned. I know Mahomes may be a glaring omission, but Hitman, before I move on to Philadelphia, anything worth mentioning from possible bettable angles on Mahomes props at this stage?
Under rush attempts, I bet with him. A sharp service also gave out his under rush attempts, I believe, a day or two ago. And it got bet under that, but it feels like the number has been bouncing back. Like it feels like a lot of sharp people have been touting his under. I touted his under also earlier in the week, and it keeps getting bet back up a little bit. So I would monitor that. Like at 5.5 plus 110, which I still see out there at one very recreational book, like that would be a play for me on Mahomes under rush attempts.
All right. And with that, let's go ahead and flip the page over to Philadelphia. And as a starting point, I think it's safe to assume all eyes is going to be on Saquon Barkley in this matchup. Current over-under for rushing yards, seeing 110.5 to 112.5, actually down from as high as 116.5. I thought conventional wisdom for previous Super Bowl betting cycles was to let public money pour in on the overs for stars, get that line inflated, And then if you like the under, just wait and bet it shortly before kickoff, kind of like what you discussed with your approach to Travis Kelce this time around. But with Saquon getting early under action, do you feel like that may be a one-off or perhaps a sign of things to come with the betting market maturing and maybe it being time to discard that form of conventional wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, as far as Barkley goes, I still see, I mean, this is me just shopping like some smaller casinos and everything, but I see already a bias towards him. Like there's some no touchdown plus 180 out there. There's rush yards still. I see some 115.5, and a book like FanDuel that's a little bit sharper is at 109.5. That's going to be a guy that I think you'll have good opportunities to find day of the game. I'm sorry, was that your question, Matt? Because I was looking at, I saw in the comments somebody mentioned that the limit on the Juju prop at Circa was 750, and I was like, there's no chance because Circa would never deal a number like 750. Maybe that's an account specific thing, but Circa is always 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. It would never be 750. I looked back and it was 2,000 yesterday on that. But yeah, with Barkley, that was your question, Matt, about fading Barkley.
So that you got to my second question on Barkley before I asked it. So yeah, I was going to see what you're looking for to possibly get at to fade him in the market. It sounds like if you can find no touchdown in the range of plus 180 or rushing yards,
I'll be finding myself. Yeah, I'll be finding myself on some anti-Barkley stuff. Longest rush I played that's been beat up a little bit, but 25.5 under. I know I didn't play this personally, but I know some sharp guys have been on first quarter under rush yards around like 27.5 on him. I think that there's going to be good opportunities to play against Barkley.
All right, plenty of angles there. And from a more process-driven standpoint, to hone in on that first question, I was curious to see under money come in on Barkley pretty early because he had been at 116.5, and then we're seeing him now 110.5 to 112.5. And previously for the Super Bowl, the conventional wisdom was to just sit back and wait. If you want to fade a star player, let public money pour in on the over, inflate those lines, and then just get your unders in shortly before kickoff. But Hitman, to rephrase it, with Saquon seeing that early under money, do you view this as more of a one-off scenario or perhaps a sign that we may want to go ahead and discard that conventional wisdom?
I mean, it depends. It depends what books. Like, yeah, he's been getting bet under at a book like FanDuel. That's a good source of truth for props, and they're sharp and everything, and they'll take a little bit more risk. But at a lot of square shops, like you're gonna get opportunities, and not everybody has the same outs as somebody that does this full time and everything. But yeah, I just think that that's the best way to handle it.
All right, and one more question on Barkley coming from Steven Robinson again in the chat. Barkley to have most rushing yards in the first quarter at minus 180 at an offshore. What do you think of that? Hitman, based on what you described, I'm guessing you're not looking to back Barkley in this form, but seeing that line for this market, any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variance in first quarter rushing yards to lay that juice. I mean, one of the biggest variances is the fact that the coin flip could go against you and Kansas City gets 2 possessions to Philadelphia getting 1. So, yeah, I can't just accurately price it off the top of my head. Like maybe it could be good, but just subjectively thinking about it, not racing to bet that.
And another player who you might think is inaccurately priced right now, maybe Dallas Goedert. I can understand that a lot of people were eager to move on him when his lines opened, but based on the heavy movement we've seen in terms of his receiving yardage output, and based on this matchup against the Chiefs team that's known to give up some production to opposing tight ends, I think we do need to at the same time consider the price point. This line steaming from the mid 40s to the low 50s, some books approaching the mid 50s at this stage. And Hitman, you'd indicated elsewhere that piques your interest for a potential under on Goedert at some point. Any target number to step in front of that overtrain when it comes to Goedert receiving yards?
I bet some under 53.5 on him. Now that was a little bit of a rogue price. I think there's a lot of, it's mostly 51.5 out there right now, but that's kind of the number that I've been betting a little bit of under on him. And honestly, I suspect I'm probably going to find some better than 53.5 once the game comes, because he has been an extremely popular over guy throughout like a lot of the shows, the content being done out there, some services. And I understand the matchup specific things that people are talking about, but it is just a very high number for a player like Dallas Goedert on a team that their over under pass attempts is 26.5 this week. Like, it's just a very high number for him. So I'm kind of looking to play against some of this team that's been on Dallas Goedert.
And speaking of the Eagles' projected pass attempts and the quarterback who's going to be throwing Goddard the ball from time to time, want to look at Jalen Hurts in a bit of an outside-the-box way, but maybe a slightly familiar way to this show's audience. I'm looking at a same-game parlay at FanDuel. Hurts anytime touchdown scorer paired with under 36.5 rushing yards for a payout of plus 339. The handicap here, similar to what I broke down on the conference championship show with Rob Pizzola. We've got an inverse correlation here, but I think it's overly priced in. If we look at the first leg, Hurts to score a touchdown, the brotherly shove, about as effective as any short yardage play without having a significant impact on yardage output. And when we look at yardage, the second leg here, Hurts looked better than I expected in the conference championship game, but I'm still not sure how close his knee is going to be to 100%. And at the same time, while I like this bet quite a bit, I always try to look at both sides of a coin. And looking at a potential fly in the ointment here from a touchdown perspective, Spags gets 2 weeks to prepare and may have something special up his sleeve to somehow neutralize the tush push. And from a yardage standpoint, I'll note that I like this one even more at 40.5 rushing yards for Hurts to the under before someone hit that line a couple of days ago. That said, Hitman, are you seeing value in anything better than, let's say, 3-1 on an SGP, Hurts to score a touchdown paired with under 36.5 rushing yards?
I do like the logic of it very much. I don't think the Chiefs, Steve Spagnuolo, is not going to have anything in store to stop the tush push. Like, no team has stopped it for 2 years. So I don't think 2 weeks to prepare is going to make a difference with that. But yeah, I mean, I like the logic of it. Again, like I bet Jalen Hurts under 40.5. There's 38.5 minus 109 out there right now, which I still think is good. 37.5 would be my cutoff on it. There's been some rumblings about Hurts could need a cleanup on his knee. I mean, he's coming off the worst rushing output game that he had this entire season. Last week, if you just watch the games, the eye test has just said he's a player that's kind of avoided contact on a lot of these runs. I know you say like, oh, it's a Super Bowl. Of course, he's not going to avoid contact. Well, in the playoffs, he's been avoiding contact seemingly a lot on these rushes. Like, there's been opportunities for him to run forward, and he's been running sideways on some of these plays. So I like it just because, as I mentioned, I think that the handicap on Hurts under rush yards is good, and I don't think that they're still going to run the tush push. So
I will take that agreement, and I will also see if you might be bullish on Hurts in one way, whereas you're not bullish on his rushing yardage prospects. I kind of think there might be some value on Hurts to win Super Bowl MVP. I'm seeing that at plus 370 at FanDuel right now, and just a bit of math here, but the break-even probability when we're talking plus 370 is 21.3%, if I'm doing my calculation correctly. And the no-vig money line, let's call it plus 110, implied probability there, 47.6% chance that the Eagles win this game. So getting out of the minutia with that math, the high-level takeaway here, the odds are telling us that Hurts wins MVP less than half the time Philadelphia wins this game. Now, I understand Hurts is not as important to the Eagles as Mahomes is to Kansas City, and it shouldn't surprise anybody to see Saquon voted the MVP if the Eagles win. But Hitman, I struggle to fathom a world in which a quarterback doesn't win the MVP at least half the time his team wins the Super Bowl. Any thoughts on this look?
Yeah, I agree with you on that too. I it's going to be a different game for the Eagles than the past few weeks, in my opinion, where Jalen Hurts is going to have to make plays to win this game. In my opinion, it's just different beating Jordan Love and the Rams and a team like Washington than it is slaying the Chiefs. Like, I just don't think it's going to be in a game script where Jalen Hurts throws the ball 20 times like some of these other games that we've seen. So, yeah, I can agree with that.
All right, we'll take more agreement as far as Hertz is concerned. And Hitman, I want to open this up a bit. I think I'm done peppering you with my specific questions as far as player props go. I know you've mentioned value in props that are only available for the Super Bowl as opposed to props that books post every week of the season. And to that end, before we close the book on specific prop bets for this game, anything else you consider actionable now or are monitoring closely to potentially bet before kickoff?
Most of the stuff we touched on, like most of the unders that we touched on, is stuff that I'm monitoring day of the game or day before the game. Cross sport props, I love doing those. There's just a lot of opportunities to take advantage of slow moving books on them. Could be stuff that's news related or anything. You can there's some opportunities on those, but yeah, it's pretty much it. As the ones we touched on are the big name players.
All right. Well, we will turn the page on props in a moment here, but we have two more questions from the chat. I'll start with a specific prop bet floated our way by friend of the show, Adam Orphan. Hitman, any thoughts on a 2-point conversion attempted at plus 105 or a successful 2-point conversion attempt at plus 260?
I didn't run math on it or anything, but I know a sharp guy that was touting no 2-point conversion attempted at minus 110. Mm-hmm. So I kind of just cede to them on that. So I really don't love yes at plus 105. To be honest, I was looking to possibly bet no at minus 110-ish.
All right. And by any chance, was that sharp guy you referenced also a prominent Adam in the sports betting space?
No.
Okay. I was thinking this might be ETR, but you might have gotten it from somebody else as well.
Oh, it was someone with ETR. It was Jack Miller, who's
gotcha.
a friend, who I'm friendly with.
Oh, good call. That might be my mix up. Also, yeah, probably from Rob's live stream today.
I'm friendly with him. Yeah. But yeah, I would just cede towards them on that market.
All right, serves me right for mixing up Jack and Adam when I was trying to multitask, watching that stream, betting what I could while also getting through my workday. But appreciate the thoughtful answer to Adam's question. And we've got one more, a bit more process driven here, but a question from Zev expressing interest in how you budget your research and learning time over the course of a week in terms of hours spent doing the kind of analysis that it takes to succeed as much as you can in the Super Bowl. So Hitman, I've got this question up on the screen as well. How would you speak to this part of your process?
I'm just trying to understand it perfectly. If you're asking like how I balance like research and learning time over the course of the week compared to like betting and everything, it's a lot of work because getting the bets in and maintaining relationships and outs and all that is so much more difficult than just finding the winning bets. Like, not to sound like conceited about it, but like most people can win, whether it's your top down betting or you're just looking for derivative markets. Like you can win. It's just about maintaining the out. So I know that's not like specifically what he asked, but it's a lot of hours, pretty much. It's just a lot of hours. It's being glued to the computer, glued to the phone. And I think the one big adjustment that I made this year and why I had a really good prop year is in the past, I would be racing to bet the openers immediately without fully handicapping the game just to get to the openers before other people did. And this year, I just kind of let the market mature a little bit. I said, you know what, I'm going to lose out on some of the openers. It's fine, but I'm just going to make sure that I handicap the props of each individual game as good as I possibly can. And I'm going to try more to win at post. And the limits are a lot higher at post if I can do that. So that was a big adjustment that I made this year as far as just the research during the week and all that. But I hope I answered that correctly. I don't know if I did, but I was just trying to interpret it as good as I could.
Yeah, Zev, feel free to follow up if there's any other point of clarification you want to hit on, but I think that was plenty of insight, and also a good transition for me to speak to a question that just came in the chat from Brady asking about accepted penalties and shortest touchdown, remembering them from last year. Yeah, last year, penalties under was one of my favorite bets, but by the time the game kicked off, Hitman, to your point about the market evolving and needing to adjust from year to year, I feel like by the time the game kicked off last season, it was almost impossible to find a bettable number on accepted penalties to the under. I think the cat might be out of the bag, and still shop around. The more books and odd sets you have access to, the more opportunities to maybe get a good edge, but that's just not what it used to be in my book. Shortest touchdown, similar concept on my end, although I would say that one I am seeing more price discrepancy from book to book. So especially with a team like the Eagles, I know this isn't the highest total in the world, but 48.5 is still relatively high this day and age for the NFL. And with what the Eagles can do in short yardage, I especially like a look at shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards. I'm personally willing to go up to probably a max of minus 180 on that. I think DraftKings is sub 170 right now. Some ruck books may be a bit lower as well. So not a comfortable pill to swallow when we're talking that much vig, but especially with the Eagles, I think there might still be a little bit of value left as far as the shortest touchdown market goes. Any thought on your end, Hitman, when it comes to either accepted penalties or shortest touchdown?
If there is a team that's going to have value on it, it's Eagles games, because once you get to the 1 yard line, it's essentially a guaranteed touchdown. It's not a market I paid attention to much. I mean, I remember the days where I was betting shortest touchdown under 1.5 minus 125 in a game that was totaled 52, and the same line would be up at a lot of books at minus 125 on a game that was totaled 38. So the cat's kind of out of the bag with that prop. The penalty stuff, I haven't seen it at a lot of books this year. I feel like I heard somewhere that a lot of the legal books can't offer it anymore. Anything with accepted penalties. I might be wrong. It might have just been one specific. I know the Westgate in Las Vegas got sent a message from the league about that, about them not wanting them to offer it. If it is still up on offshores, I mean, that was typically a prop I would look to play under on, just because I did believe that there was some truth in the league not trying to throw as many penalty flags in the Super Bowl, so it's not the talk of Monday the next day about all the flags in the Super Bowl. But yeah, I don't got much to add on that.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we've covered a lot of good ground when it comes to props. So now we'll go ahead and shift gears to the hops. And Hitman, you've gone on record as saying the Super Bowl is the most fun you have watching a game all season. You have a plan to enjoy a few cocktails during the game. To that end, do you have anything specific lined up as far as the cocktails you'll enjoy during the Super Bowl on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, the espresso martini's the go-to now for me, so I'll probably stick with that. Nice little energy boost too, because it's probably going to be a late night. I like to get a lot of my grading done as quick as possible, and there's going to be a lot of grading I'm going to have to do, whether it's looking at tickets from all the casinos that I've been to or individual people that I bet with, grading the props that we bet together. So it's probably going to be a late night for me. So we'll get the espresso martinis flowing.
Nice. I like the sound of that. And I'm also going to note that, Hitman, as you spoke to that, Brady jumped back in the chat and in a good call out, a good penalty price on Bookmaker for what it's worth. I'm looking right now. I'm seeing total penalties in the game. Now, I always like to read the fine print. I assume they are referring to accepted penalties in the game, but if we get one or two declined, it's always a good nuance to account for.
Yeah.
Bookmaker right now, total penalties in the game, the under paying out plus 118. Last year, for reference, I was able to get minus 105, and I saw that close minus 190 under 10.5 accepted penalties. Last year was quite a roller coaster ride. I think we had 9 penalties in the first half, none in the second half, and then it flew over as soon as the game went to overtime. Story of a lot of bettors' lives to have a prop on the under, and then overtime comes and rears its ugly head. But Hitman, if we're looking at a shop like Bookmaker hanging plus 118 on under 10.5 penalties in this matchup, to rewind back into the props for a moment here, is that as valuable as Brady and I might think it is?
I mean, it's always harder because it is a sharp book that's putting it out, and presumably they're taking decent limits on it. I'm not sure what the limits are. A lot of times that will tell how efficient the line is.
Yep.
But I don't know. You're kind of catching me on the spot because I haven't even thought about penalties since last year on what the line should be or something like that. So it's hard for me to say. But I will say that it has been a system of mine that I have looked to play a lot of no under penalties. I was betting no roughing the passer at some point for years in the Super Bowl. I really don't remember the fair prices that I had on off the top of my head.
All right, I hear you on that. I'm going to go ahead and say that at plus money, it definitely does catch my interest. I see another comment here from Jay Wilkin. Too late, it's moving. I did just see it tick down to plus 115. I'm going to go ahead and give our live audience a bit more time here. And even if it ticks down a bit farther, I'll still bet it. But I don't want to scoop up the 115 before anybody else has a crack at it, should they want it. But yeah, in plus money territory, then I'm very curious at the least. So with that in mind, maybe that will put props in the books for good for the purposes of this episode. And Hitman, I know we touched on the hops. So to weave in the final pillar of this show, the Malinsky Minute, as we near the end of the season, I'm often reminded how well-rounded Dave was known to be. And the end of the football season used to just cause withdrawals for me the day after the Super Bowl, wondering when the next football game would be. And now I kind of look forward to the change of pace that the offseason brings. I'm wondering what it looks like for you when we think about life after the Super Bowl and how you describe what you're most looking forward to this offseason.
Yeah. Probably going to try to take fitness a little bit more seriously. Maybe, I don't know what that entails, maybe personal trainer, something like that, just because you spend 5-6 months in a desk chair or in a car driving to books and stuff like that. It's not the healthiest lifestyle. So, going to try to do some fitness stuff. Obviously, golf is a big enjoyment of mine. So get in a lot of golf and get in a lot of traveling as well. So that's kind of the big three of what I'm going to be doing. And I'm still betting. It's just a lot of top down, like following news, just looking for stale stuff, off market stuff. Have some guys that I work with that are really good in other sports that will share some stuff with me. So, yeah, it's pretty much my off season.
Sounds like a great plan. I like those 3 pillars, and that's a pretty good note to start to put a bow around this episode. But not going to call it a wrap on NFL content for the season quite yet. A couple of quick programming notes for the audience. After this show, I'm about to join my friend Christopher Harris, the host of the wildly popular Harris Football Podcast, to talk betting on his Super Bowl show, dropping Thursday morning. And I'm also honored to be lined up to rejoin Captain Jack Andrews and the Unabated team alongside some insanely esteemed company on Saturday evening for Super Stream 59. You can catch that on Unabated's social channels. And also looking forward to continuing to connect with Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., 2 true titans of industry, on a weekly basis on the Prime Suspects podcast. So we'll keep that going on a weekly basis year round. As far as props and hops goes, I plan to be back occasionally during the offseason for noteworthy events in the worlds of betting and beer, but not before a welcome break to unwind and recharge. Now, I can't sign off without first sharing a few special thank yous. To the audience, thank you for tuning in this week and all season long. To every guest who's been so generous with their time and insight this season, thank you as well. And the biggest thank you to my wife, Allison, who's been the most generous when it comes to giving me the support and space to make this show the best I possibly can. Now, one more thing to the audience. This is the one time of year I'll put out this ask. If you find value in this show and you're tuning in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating. If you're with us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're with us on Twitter, go ahead and follow the show at Props and Hops Pod and myself at Lay of the Landis. For easy reference, you can find links to all of the above in these show notes. And you may not find value in everything I have to say, but I think we can agree that there is definitely value in what Hitman has to say. So also want to make sure everybody catching this goes ahead and follows his work where they're not doing so already, with the hammer, with covers, and of course at hitmansports.net. I cannot overstate how much the service there has been a game changer for me this season. Good luck if you want to find anyone better in the preseason and prop betting markets. And of course, on Twitter, you can follow him at Hitman428. Hitman, thanks for doing this. Nobody else with whom I'd rather talk Super Bowl prop betting. Wishing you and everybody listening the best of times with your bets, as well as your beverages on Super Sunday.
Appreciate it, Matt. Good luck in the Super Bowl. Thanks for having me, guys.